What if the scars you couldn't see hurt more than the ones you could? Alexander knew wounds healed, at least, the ones on the surface did. Bruises faded, cuts closed, bones mended. But what about the damage no one could see? The kind that lingered in the quiet moments, in the dead of night when the world slowed down just enough for the past to catch up. It had been a year and a half since the divorce, but some nights it felt like yesterday. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the digital clock's harsh red numbers. 3:12 a.m. Another sleepless night. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, a stark contrast to the screaming match that used to fill his nights. Harper's voice still echoed in his head, sharp and unforgiving. "You'll never be enough. No one else will put up with you like I did." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair and exhaled slowly, as if trying to push the memories out with his breath. They didn't leave. They never did. The morning light did little to ease the weight pressing against his chest. As he made his way to the kitchen, the sterile white walls of his apartment felt more like a prison than a home. He poured himself a cup of tea, black, bitter, just how he liked it. Or maybe it was how he deserved it. Today was just another day to get through. No expectations, no surprises, no unnecessary attachments. That was how he survived now. But life had a way of unraveling even the most carefully constructed walls. The bookstore smelled of aged paper and fresh ink, the kind of scent that pulled people into worlds beyond their own. Alexander preferred bookstores for that reason. There was no need for conversation, no obligation to engage, just him, the books, and the comfort of silence. He was reaching for a copy of The Art of Letting Go when another hand brushed against his. "Sorry," a soft voice said, a hint of amusement lacing the word. Alexander glanced up. She had warm hazel eyes and an easy smile, the kind that made a person feel lighter just by looking at it. "It's fine," he replied, quickly pulling his hand away. She studied him for a second, then tilted her head toward the book. "That one's good, but the title's misleading. It doesn't actually tell you how to let go." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Not surprising. You a fan of self-help books?" she asked, her voice carrying no judgment, only curiosity. "Just passing time." She nodded, as if she understood something he hadn't said. "I'm Stella, by the way." He hesitated. Giving his name felt like an opening, a door he wasn't sure he wanted to unlock. But there was something about her, gentle but steady, like a quiet force that didn't demand attention yet, couldn't be ignored. "Alexander." "Well, Alexander," she said, her smile widening, "since we both seem to be experts at passing time, want to grab a tea?" The question caught him off guard. It was so casual, so effortless, as if it required no real thought. But for him, it was anything but simple. He could almost hear Harper's voice whispering in the back of his mind. "People don't really care about you, Alex. They just pretend." So he did what he always did. He retreated. "Thanks, but I should get going," he said, taking a step back. Stella didn't press. She just nodded, as if she expected the answer. Maybe another time then. Maybe. As he walked away, a strange unease settled in his chest. Not fear, not regret, but something else. Something he wasn't ready to name. But some moments refused to be ignored, and some people had a way of showing up when you least expected them. It had been 3 days since he met Stella, and Alexander still couldn't shake the encounter. It wasn't just that she had been kind. It was the ease in her voice, the way she looked at him, like he wasn't broken beyond repair. He wasn't used to that. He had spent the last year and a half avoiding connections, retreating into a world where loneliness was predictable and safe. It was better to be alone than risk falling into another cycle of hurt. Jackson, his best friend, didn't share that philosophy. "You're telling me a woman literally asked you to get tea and you turned her down?" Jackson scoffed, stirring his drink as they sat at their usual bar. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" Alexander exhaled. "I'm not looking for anything right now." Jackson leaned back, arms crossed. "You've been saying that since the divorce. At what point does not looking just turn into hiding?" Alexander didn't respond. Maybe because Jackson was right, but knowing the truth, didn't make it any easier. The next afternoon, life threw him another unexpected moment. He had stepped into a small restaurant, planning to grab his usual black tea and leave, when he spotted her. Stella. She was sitting by the window with a group of friends, her laughter carrying through the space like a melody. There was something effortless about her, like she belonged anywhere she went. Alexander should have turned around, should have left before she saw him, but before he could, she looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled. And against his better judgment, he found himself walking toward her. "Hey," she said, genuinely surprised. "Didn't think I'd see you again." He shrugged, unsure what to say. One of her friends glanced between them, a knowing look in her eyes. "Stella, aren't you going to introduce us?" Stella chuckled. "This is Alexander. We met at the bookstore." Her friend grinned. "Ah, the mysterious bookstore guy." Alexander shifted uncomfortably. This was a mistake. But then Stella spoke again, her voice light. "I was just telling them about my art therapy sessions. You ever tried painting?" He almost laughed at the idea. Not really my thing." "You'd be surprised," she said. "Sometimes the things we think aren't for us are exactly what we need." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. Maybe she was right. Maybe. But the past didn't let go so easily. And some fears weren't so easily erased. The invitation hung in the air between them, light-hearted but laced with something deeper. Alexander wasn't sure if it was curiosity or caution that made him hesitate. Maybe both. "I'll think about it," he said. Not quite a yes, but not a no either. Stella didn't push. She simply nodded, as if she understood that for someone like him, even considering something new was a small victory. And somehow, that made it harder to walk away. Later that night, Alexander found himself staring at a blank canvas, not one meant for painting, but the kind his mind created when memories surfaced uninvited. The apartment was quiet, but his thoughts were loud. He could still hear Harper's voice, sharp and condescending. "Why would anyone want you?" He had once believed love was about endurance, about proving you were worth staying for. But all he had proven was how easy it was to break someone who kept trying. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. A message. From Harper. "Hope you're doing okay." It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Because behind those 4 words was a lifetime of manipulation, one he still wasn't sure he had escaped. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned off his phone and stared at the empty space in front of him, wondering if some ghosts ever really left. 2 days later, he saw Stella again. This time, he didn't overthink it. He just sat across from her at the restaurant, watching as she stirred cream into her tea. "You actually showed up," she said, her lips curving into a small smile. He wasn't sure if she meant it as a joke or an observation. Maybe both. "I guess I did." They talked, and for once Alexander didn't feel like he was trying. He learned that she worked with trauma survivors through art, that she believed creativity could heal wounds words couldn't reach. She asked him about his interests. He didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone had asked, since he had even thought about it himself. He told her about his work, about how he liked the structure of it, the predictability. "You like control?" she noted, her voice gentle but knowing. He tensed. "I like stability." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I get that." And strangely, he believed her. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't feel so heavy, but ghosts had a way of creeping back in. Later that evening, Harper's name flashed on his screen again. This time, she called. He didn't answer, but the damage was already done. Because just like that, the walls he had started to lower snapped back into place. By the time Stella messaged him later that night, he couldn't bring himself to respond. The message from Stella sat unread on his phone. Alexander saw it. He thought about responding. But his fingers never moved, his mind already tangled in the web Harper had spun around him for years. He hated that she still had this hold over him. It was just a call, just a message, nothing more. But it wasn't just anything. Harper's voice had always carried weight, pressing down on him until he questioned his own reality. Even in her silence, she lingered like a storm cloud, unpredictable and suffocating. He should have ignored it, should have let the past stay where it belonged. But closure was a funny thing. Sometimes, it looked like an open wound disguised as an invitation. And so, against his better judgment, he found himself dialing her number. It rang twice before she answered. Alex. The way she said his name made his stomach turn. Soft, familiar, deceptive. Why are you calling me, Harper? A sigh. I just wanted to check in. Why? Do I need a reason? He let out a bitter laugh. With you? Yeah. A pause. Then, I miss talking to you. The words hit him harder than they should have. Not because he believed them, but because he knew exactly what they were, bait. And for years, he had fallen for it. Not this time. I have to go, he said, his voice colder than he expected. Alex, wait. He hung up. His hands were shaking. Harper had taken so much from him. His confidence, his ability to trust, his belief that love wasn't just another word for control. But she wouldn't take this moment. He grabbed his phone and opened Stella's message. Hey, I had fun today. Let me know if you ever want to do it again. For a long moment, he just stared. Then, slowly, he typed out a response. I'd like that. He hit send before he could change his mind. And for the first time in years, it felt like maybe the past wasn't the only thing shaping his future. Alexander wasn't used to anticipation. Most of his days were predictable. Carefully constructed routines designed to avoid unnecessary interactions. But tonight was different. Tonight he was meeting Stella again. It wasn't a date. At least, that's what he told himself. Just two people getting tea. Nothing more. But then why was he standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt for the third time? He shook his head, grabbed his keys, and left before he could overthink it. The restaurant was quieter than usual, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. Stella was already there, sketchbook open, pencil moving effortlessly across the page. She looked up when he approached, her eyes lighting up in a way that made something in his chest tighten. You came, she said, closing the sketchbook. I said I would. True, she smiled. But I wasn't sure if you'd change your mind. He frowned. Why would you think that? She shrugged, wrapping her hands around her cup. Because people who've been hurt take a long time to trust again. His stomach twisted at the accuracy of her words. She didn't say it in a way that made him feel broken, though. She just said it like it was a fact, like she understood. He exhaled, glancing at her sketchbook. What were you drawing? Instead of answering, she slid it across the table. He hesitated before flipping it open. The page was filled with abstract strokes, soft lines blending into sharper edges. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't completely structured either. It looked like something in between, like someone trying to find balance. It's how I process things, she explained. When my thoughts get too loud, I put them here. He nodded, tracing a finger along one of the lines. Looks complicated, she chuckled. Yeah, but so is life. He glanced up at her. You ever feel like some things are too complicated to fix? She studied him for a moment before answering. I think some things don't need fixing. They just need understanding. The words hit him harder than he expected, because for so long he had believed he was broken, that he needed fixing before he could be anything to anyone. But what if he didn't? What if he just needed someone who understood? They sat there for a while, the silence between them not heavy, but comfortable. Time passed, and Alexander stood at his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The tea in his hand had long gone cold, but he hadn't noticed. His mind was elsewhere, caught between the past and the future. It had been 1.5 years since the divorce. And yet, some nights, it still felt like he was living in its shadow. Harper hadn't called again. Maybe she had finally let go. Or maybe she was just waiting for the right moment to pull him back in. Either way, it didn't matter. Not anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, he was making choices for himself. Choices that weren't rooted in fear or obligation. Choices that felt like freedom. And Stella was one of them. They met at the park that afternoon, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and something unspoken between them. "You seem lighter today," she noted as they walked, hands tucked into their coat pockets. He exhaled, watching the breath escape his lips like a ghost finally set free. "I feel lighter," she smiled. "That's good." For a moment they walked in silence, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet filling the space between words. Then he stopped. "Can I ask you something?" Stella turned to face him, her expression open. "Of course." He hesitated, then forced himself to speak. "What if I never completely heal from the divorce?" Her eyes softened. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "What if I never stop questioning myself, or second-guessing people's intentions? What if I'm always afraid of being manipulated again?" Stella didn't rush to answer. She let the words settle, as if giving them the weight they deserved. Then she spoke. "I think healing isn't about erasing the past," she said gently. "It's about learning how to live with it without letting it control you." Alexander swallowed hard. "And what if I never fully trust again?" She took a step closer. "Then you take it one day at a time, one step at a time, with people who are patient enough to walk with you." His chest tightened. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that love didn't have to be a battlefield where the strongest survivor won. Maybe love could be something softer, something safe. Maybe love wasn't about proving anything. Maybe it was just about being. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to see what was in front of him, not what was behind him. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled. "Neither do I, but I think we figure it out together." He exhaled a shaky breath, and then, slowly, carefully, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, and just like that the weight of the past felt a little lighter. He wasn't fully healed. He wasn't sure if he ever would be. But maybe healing wasn't the goal. Maybe moving forward was. And for the first time since the divorce, Alexander was finally ready to try.